One of the things that amused me about Hillary's plan to defeat ISIS was, what the fuck do you think we're already doing? I mean, there's nothing there that the government isn't already working on, no matter how haphazardly. But so just this week, we had a Marine killed in a rocket attack in Iraq. He's the second American killed in this totally not a ground war with boots on the ground operation. Peter, we knew the Pentagon was full of shit when they said that. How full of shit were they?
Well, I mean, it's pathetically full of shit, if that is a measure of full of shitness. The way the Pentagon, when they got caught, because this guy got killed, what they said is, well, Congress has allotted 3,852 troops to be in Iraq, and that's how many there really are permanently. And the idea was that the Marine unit was deployed offshore, on one of the assault ships, and they were only in Iraq temporarily. I mean, of course, as we all are, right? And so they didn't count against the head count. And so at this point, we really have no idea how many Americans are there. John McCain has estimated it as high as 5,000 uniformed people. And let's stop right there, because the uniformed people, the ones we actually recognize as soldiers and Marines, are just a part of what we've got there. We have probably 3,000 contractors in Iraq right now doing the support stuff, the maintenance, a lot of them doing guard duty, things like that. They tend not to be out in the wilds of Anbar. They tend to be back in Kurdistan, but there's a lot of them there. And then we don't even have a clue how many CIA people, paramilitaries, what have you. But if you start to add up the number of Americans who are there now who weren't there a year and a half ago, it's a big number. And it's a number that will only grow because what we're doing there doesn't have a conclusion. We will, in the end, have permanent bases in Iraq, the thing that we had talked about having and wanted to have for a long time and just never kind of happened. We're going to have those there. We're going to be garrisoning Iraq indefinitely at this point, as we are Afghanistan and everywhere else. We've been lied to. We've caught the government lying to us, and we simply do not care.
Josh, it really doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of difference between what Obama's doing now, what Hillary wants to do, and what George Bush did, except that Obama's doing it a lot more quietly. How do the liberals get away with the things that they accuse George Bush of war crimes over?
Well, again, I think it's partially because of sort of the narrative. One thing that, one hallmark of the Obama administration has not been deft handling of the press. That is not a strength that he has or a particular skill set I think the administration has in general. However, I think that, at least with this, they don't really push back on the Republican narrative that, President Obama is doing nothing to stop ISIS. They basically admit that they're doing something, but they don't give it a vigorous defense. And I think that's because, Democrats Democrats don't like to make a big deal about the war shit they do, whereas Republicans love nothing better than to be a war president. So I think that part of the reason that Obama is able to get away with it is because less numbers of troops. Now, and what I know about how military bases and operations work and what Iraq's like, I would think the number could be as high as 8,000 to 10,000 Americans, civilians and military in Iraq right now. I don't think that would be a stretch. But even that isn't what is the levels we were at, say, 6-7 years ago. And I think that's part of the reason why they're able to get away with it, because even though only 1%, actually less than 1% of the American population fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, served in the military over there, there was still, you couldn't really get away from the fact that we had people over there. And, there were people in the news all the time dying. The news cared a lot more about what was happening in Iraq then. Today, all eyes are on Trump, and Obama's trying to kind of be boring so he can get stuff, because he can get stuff done when no one's looking. And that's in part because of how controversial the Republicans have made anything he tries to do. So I think that has become, ironically, the preferred operating mode for the guy who promised to be the most transparent president in the history of the United States.
Keep in mind that George Bush was...
explain it.
Josh's video is getting caught up right now. Go ahead, Peter.
Sorry.
I think you're doing too excited, Josh. I think it overloads the internet.
It's the hat. It's the hat. They can't. There's not enough pixels for the hat's awesomeness.
But keep in mind, George Bush fought in Iraq for WMDs that didn't exist and regime change, and all these kind of things that aren't kind of liberal thinking. Obama's fighting against terrorism. He's picked up again, and we go back to the idea of fear. He's the one who's right. We're on the front lines. We're going after ISIS. They won't even call them ISIS, right? Because it's like, woo, we're going to call them Daesh, and then they're going to really be pissed off because we're calling them a name. We're right on the front lines. We're fighting them out there, and so it seems okay. I mean, who can argue that killing ISIS is a bad thing? So I think it's partially the way we're manipulated and which lever the President Bush versus Obama versus whoever's next decides to pull. In the end, it's the same thing. And by the way, the 10,000 I think is a great number to play with right now. It wouldn't surprise me if it's a lot more.
I don't know if it came through when I was talking, but the one thing I said too, I think, is that unlike using troops. Obama's been able to do a lot with drones, which doesn't have that same sort of human cost for us. It's a great terrorist maker, especially in the wrong place. But I think that's another reason why, is because he's using robots, not America's kids.
All right. Well, that's probably as good a point to end this very depressing edition of Latest.com show on this week. And next week we'll come back and talk about something equally consequential, like the coming Donald Trump presidency. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for reading Latest.com. See you next